This is All India Radio. In the program Spotlight now, we bring you a discussion on BRICS Summit 2021, Expectations and Challenges. The participants are Bhashwati Mukherjee, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist.
India will be hosting the 13th BRICS Summit virtually on September the 9th. It will be the third time that India will be hosting the BRICS Summit, and the second time Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji will be chairing the summit of BRICS leaders. The meeting is going to be attended also virtually by the President of Brazil, Mr. Bolsonaro, Russian President Vladimir Putin, the Chinese President Xi Jinping, and the South African President Mr. Cyril Ramaphosa. The interesting thing that will initially be happening is that the Indian National Security Advisor, Shri Ajit Doval, will be giving a roundup on the security situation, an overall roundup to the leaders. As the chair, India plans to work on specific deliverables across all three pillars of intra-BRICS cooperation in 2021. High amongst these is the political and security agenda, which includes reform of the multilateral system and counter-terrorism cooperation. Bhashwati, what do you think will be the dominating points on the agenda for the BRICS leaders on Thursday?
Well, Nilofa, as you yourself pointed out, this is going to be a most important summit. This is the third time that India will be hosting the BRICS summit after 2012 and 2016. And the international scenario has completely changed with the dramatic and rapid developments in Afghanistan. The very fact that our Prime Minister is chairing the meeting and he is going to be joined by the heads of state of Brazil, Russian Federation, South Africa and China lends a gravitas to this event because of the fact, as you've pointed out, that our National Security Advisor, Mr. Ajit Doval, would be beginning by giving a briefing. And I'm sure it doesn't need an astrologer to predict that he would be giving a thorough briefing about the threats to international peace and security in our region, which are of direct concern to all BRICS members, as well as our perspective on what is happening in Afghanistan. Moreover, the theme of the meeting as far as India is concerned is cooperation for continuity, consolidation and consensus. And as you yourself have pointed out, counter-terrorism is a very important item along with reform of multilateralism. Now, I think that counter-terrorism could be woven into the developments in our neighborhood. And I think that what India would like to bring to its BRICS partners is a better appreciation of the kind of challenges that India is facing, given the fact that Pakistan is now directly interfering in the internal affairs of Afghanistan, that the Pakistani ISI chief has been in Kabul now, this is his third day, and that reportedly the Pakistani Air Force used drones to bomb Panjshir and has taken credit also for the so-called downfall of this very important strategic part of Afghanistan, given the fact that Iran has now strongly protested. I don't think that these developments could bring much comfort even to the Russian Federation, and certainly it would give a perspective to the Brazilian president and the South African president, and it would give us an opportunity also to interface and interact with China and to ascertain from China what their views are, given that although China seems to be in the embrace of Wahhabi Islam outside China, there is no embrace of Wahhabi Islam inside China. And at some point, this contradiction is bound to cause discomfort to the Chinese. So all in all, a very interesting meeting, and it will be very interesting to see how the agenda plays out once Mr. Doval has given his overview about security developments in our immediate neighborhood and which are of direct concern to all BRICS members.
It is interesting that Nikolai Patrushev has arrived in India also right ahead of the summit, ostensibly for the India-Russia intergovernmental meeting. But the fact is that he and Mr. Doval are obviously going to be exchanging a lot of concerns and a lot of views on how this changed situation in Afghanistan will affect the region. And yesterday, the Russian ambassador to India actually mentioned that both India and Russia are extremely worried about the prospects of terrorist groups coming out over to Kashmir from Afghanistan and into Russia. Now, given these concerns that certainly Russia and India have. Do you think there's scope that the Chinese president can perhaps be addressed directly to understand how he is so optimistic, shall we say, about the Taliban at this point of time?
Well, the Chinese President Nilova, I don't think is optimistic. He is perhaps hopeful that his pressure on Taliban not to include that particular terrorist grouping that they call the terrorist grouping, which is linked to the Uyghurs, will not be part of the Taliban anymore, which to me seems very unrealistic since they have fought with the Taliban and are comrades in arms. But more than that, our external affairs minister is also a Russian expert. And we would expect certainly in interaction with the Russians on this particular issue, given that the Russians had earlier said that they don't want refugee flows into Central Asia because they were afraid that among the Afghan refugees there would be terrorists who would make their way into Central Asia and then would threaten Russia's security. And yet also that those in the Panjshir Valley who escaped into Tajikistan. So these are very interesting developments which show that there is a counter resistance growing, and the fact that the Russian Federation had sought from Taliban apparently guarantees that there would be no mention of Chechnya ever by the Taliban as a matter of concern to them as fellow Muslims in Chechnya. It doesn't really matter whether the Taliban mentions or not because it's not a homogeneous group and we don't know how much of governance and control they have over Afghanistan. The point is that they are linked with a whole number of terrorist groups and therefore the Russian concerns are quite similar to ours. And I am sure that if the Russians articulate them in this meeting where the Chinese president is listening, I'm sure it would have a greater resonance than if we took it up bilaterally with the Chinese. As I said again, this summit gives us an opportunity to find common points and also to make the Chinese understand that the situation in Afghanistan is fraught with danger as it presently is, and it must be brought under some kind of control, governance, rule of law without the overt interference of Pakistan.
Indeed, it is such a specious kind of argument to suggest that Chechnya and the Uyghurs will be left out of any Islamic conversation which an organization supposedly pan-Islamic like the Taliban intends to take up and only concentrate on Jammu and Kashmir. I mean, that is a completely specious kind of way of thinking or presenting things. Afghanistan, of course, will be perhaps primary on the agenda that the summiteers will be focusing on. The other major fact remains that the world is just about coming out of this horrendous pandemic that has swept the globe, and economic issues and revival of the global economy should also be a very major part of what they discuss. So in that context, what do you think, moving away from Afghanistan, they will be trying to focus on? I mean, how will that be working out or panning out?
The meeting is taking place on the eve of the General Assembly session. Our Prime Minister is reportedly going to New York. He will also be meeting, hopefully, President Biden. So there would be, as you rightly pointed out, issues relating to reform or multilateralism, which will be on the agenda. And the theme also, which is continuity, consolidation, and consensus, gives an indication of the kind of path that the Indian chair, Prime Minister Modi, will take. Because there would be, of course, discussion. You cannot get away from the fact that there would be discussion on COVID-19. The discussions would focus on the whole issue of vaccination, on the whole issue of safety, on the whole issue of opening up the global economy, air travel, etc., etc. As far as the economic growth is concerned, the impediments to trade, difficulties being faced in WTO, these are again issues which we would probably discuss amongst ourselves. And there would of course be issues which we would need to discuss as BRICS members amongst ourselves. And one of them possibly could be India's suggestion, the reform of the Security Council, because that is high on South Africa's and Brazil's agenda. Maybe this would provide an opportunity to get the Chinese to soften their position, because so far they have not pronounced themselves in favor of an expansion of the P5 or even pronounced themselves on what they feel about what is now being called a semi-permanent veto for 15 years rather than ever. So these are again issues where we have the opportunity of finding out, discussing and taking the way forward. But I think the discussions on COVID-19 like Afghanistan would be very interesting because Prime Minister would have to very delicately fence around the whole issue of the origin, but talk about the future, how to combat it, etc. Because I'm sure that we would not want, as the Indian host, to get bogged down on a discussion about the origin of the virus, at least not in this kind of a summit. In any case, sure, it could have been discussed in advance with all the BRICS countries, how we would set the agenda and talk about it. There are no surprises for the heads when they join. Particularly when it's a virtual summit, Nilova, it is much more tricky. When it's a virtual summit, a surprise can always happen. Because no matter how much you prepare, a virtual summit is a virtual summit. Somebody can say something which is off the cuff and which could lead to a discussion which may not be in the best interest of the summit.
I'm sure Prime Minister is quite sort of skilled in the way he conducts conversations of this kind. I do believe that he will be focusing considerably on implementation of aspects of the BRICS economic partnership strategy for this 5-year period, and things like the cooperation on disaster resilience and digital health and traditional medicine. Now, these, over the past year and a half, this is something that we've seen come to the fore, digital health primarily. And for Africa particularly, this would also be a very important part of what they do. So I think this is another aspect that they're likely to be focusing on. China has its strengths, India has its strengths. Every country has certain strengths in this area. Do you think that this would be another area where they're cooperating?
We have in the past tried to push the economic cooperation agenda of BRICS. I must be honest and say that we have been more successful in political cooperation because in the economic cooperation, the problem has been that the BRICS members are still at different stages of economic development, and this has been worsened by the pandemic because, for instance, the pandemic hit the Brazilian economy very hard and the South African, whereas Russia and China and India the Chinese have done the best, but we have also been able to find our way out of this quagmire. So actually, this also raises the possibility of greater economic cooperation between BRICS countries in the context of those that have been badly hit, and to see how this cooperation can be improved for mutual advantage. And this is again something which fits in very well with the overall agenda of continuity, consolidation and consensus, because I do believe that there would be some important projects and agreements which would be announced both on the economic side, and also there would be a common statement on the political side which would cover the important topics both economically and politically in accordance with what you have outlined, particularly on traditional medicine, etc. These are areas of cooperation where again we would find a common front for a change. With the Chinese, they are very strong on traditional medicine as we are. It's a different kind of system they have from ours. This is again an area where we could cooperate, definitely. It would also be an opportunity for us maybe to discuss irritants within BRICS, maybe opportunities to dialogue between the BRICS partners at summit level more often when there is a crisis. This again would be very helpful given the nature of membership of BRICS, where the countries have such different perspectives on important issues. A greater interaction or a mechanism to consult between summits, a more strengthened mechanism, perhaps would be very much welcome. And perhaps this would be suggested by the Indian side when the leaders actually meet 2 days from now.
Ashwati, thank you very much indeed for all of your valuable insights.
Thank you very much, Nilova.
You were listening to a discussion on BRICS Summit 2021, Expectations and Challenges. The participants were Bhashwati Mukherjee, former diplomat, and Nilova Roy Chaudhary, journalist. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. You can listen to it on our mobile app News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel News on AIR Official. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.